a basic concept of what is, or picture profile of someone who's on the spectrum was largely assembled by Hans Asperger in pre-World War II Vienna with school-age boys. And me sitting in a minivan in a bra with a love of glitter, like, what do I have in common with them?
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. My guest today is autism advocate, speaker, and prolific author Jennifer Cook, formerly Jennifer Cook O'Toole. Since being identified as being on the autism spectrum in 2011, in conjunction with all three of her children, Jennifer has become a powerful voice in the world of autism advocacy, with a special focus on girls on the spectrum. If Jennifer's name sounds familiar to you, you most likely have one or more of her Asperkids books, which are highly empowering books that Jennifer wrote just for kids on the spectrum. She's also the author of Sisterhood on the Spectrum and the memoir Autism and Heals, the untold story of a female life on the spectrum. Jennifer's work has led to collaboration with the National Institutes of Health Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee, the President's Council on Disabilities, the Autism Society of America, Amy Poehler's Smart Girls, and many, many media outlets. We cover so much ground during this conversation, everything from labels and diagnoses, to the limits of language and the power of reframes, to the unique challenges and reality for girls on the spectrum, and so much more. I'm really excited to share this one. I hope you enjoy it. And now, here is my conversation with Jennifer. Hello, Jennifer. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I have to say, I love Tilt Parenting. Like, I love the title. I love the concept. I just think it's brilliant. So, well done.
Thank you so much. That means so much to me. And also, we were just talking before we recorded about the role that our kids can play in our work. And I will say that name was very much approved by my child. And yes, so thank you. That means a lot. So, and again, as we were talking before, there's so many things that we could talk about. Your body of work is fascinating, and there's so many things that are relevant for my community. And I did want to start a little bit about just even your identification as being on the spectrum and how that, because a lot of my parents are going through that. What's that?
My word. I love it because that's what I often say to people. I use the word diagnosis when it's appropriate in the sense that you're using the medical manual and blah, 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 blah. And I get it. And to me, I lost my best friend from college, closing in on 10 years ago, but to breast cancer. And I lost my dad 12 years ago to lung cancer. So when I hear diagnosis, I think of them. I hear illness, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I love that the word I often use is identified. I try to, encourage that in the sense that you can identify your favorite song. You can identify the love of your life, and I did have a reader who has given me express and permanent permission to use this phrase. So I'm not like, ripping him off. He says, we hear ASD, autism spectrum disorder. He said, Jennifer, what if we said dynamic instead, ASD? And I said, I loved it because, right? Like, one of the things that I think can be so incredibly discouraging to parents is that autism or AS or ASD or whatever you want to call it, right, is not the first step. It's not the first thing that no child is born and they're like, oh, and so of course I often say also about the whole identification process, like saying, it's a girl didn't make it a girl. Like, you're just identifying what is. So that's a big thing too. And getting the word, it's not like you're labeling. It's literally, you're just identifying that which already was. Mm-hmm. But the process, of course, of getting to that identification usually involves going through like sensory identifications, and then maybe attention stuff. Maybe there's OCD stuff going, but everything has a D. There's sensory integration disorder. Whether it's ADD or ADHD, there's disorder on the end of that one, right? Like through all of the anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, there's D. So not only are you having this ridiculous cocktail or alphabet soup, right? You're going through, how are those things identified? It's going through and with teachers, with friends, with physicians, with whomever, having to point out all the things that are quote unquote wrong. And then usually having to quantify that to some degree of somewhat, always, never, right? It's literally, people say don't focus on the negative, but literally that is the process. And so you go through thinking, oh no, there's this, I can maybe handle this. Oh, but there's also this. Okay, that's a little bit more. And now there's this, and now there's this, and now there's autism. And I say, no. It is like me saying to you, Debbie, you poor thing, you've got a runny nose, and the next day, Debbie, you've got a runny nose and a cough. Next day, Debbie, you've got a runny nose and a cough and watery eyes. No, you don't have three things. You have a cold. Those are all parts of, and, even in that, obviously those are complaints. But because I'm kind of paralleling it to that disorder, that's all you're hearing, right? Mm-hmm. And so the first bit of relief I give is you don't have 20 things wrong with your kiddo. You have one thing that is different. And with everything that we ever are by nature, there is both challenge and aptitude. And that's just a thing. You and I being born with two X chromosomes, odds are we're not going to be as physically strong as a man. Does that make us is that a deficit? I don't think so, because, I think I'm a rather fabulous chick, right? And they're not. To everything, there are, I don't want to say pluses and minuses, easier and harders, right? And I guess that's my first thing. And there used to be an ad campaign. I don't know. Actually, I think they still do it. The whole, congratulations, you've just won the Super Bowl or whatever. What are you doing? I'm going to Disney World. I always thought, there needs to be something that is affirming. And for a while, I had actually created, it just got too busy to keep doing them, but congratulations, you're an Aspie or on the spectrum kits, because it, I think, is so important both for families and for the individual to not see this as often the world presents it. How often have I been told, the whole phrase high functioning, this, that, and the other thing, or that is a compliment by comparison, which inherently insults someone else. And I find that incredibly upsetting. And I know it's not intended that way, but really what it means is I'm not autistic like you. And the truth is that less obviously challenged does not mean less challenged. And I've been on self-advocacy boards with, there was one, a young man, mid-20s, and he had a lot of challenges. He was in a wheelchair. There were a lot of spasmodic behaviors and activities going on, and he required an iPad to be able to verbally, communicate. It spoke. And one of the question that was presented to us first was, what is the hardest thing about being on the spectrum? And it was put to me, and thank God everybody on the panel agreed. But my answer was to always be wondering, how can I be so smart but so stupid? Mm. And what he said through his iPad was that every single day of his life, he has to explain to someone that he does not have a cognitive deficit. He does not have challenges with, his quote unquote intelligence in a typical way. In fact, his verbal IQ is in the 150s, which is high genius, but it's almost like reaching into your purse and not being able to find that dang lipstick or that dang key that is in there. He reaches into his brain. He knows it's in there, but he just can't access it. And so to me, all of this just speaks to one thing, which is that as a society, we have moved so far, at least on the surface, and I think it's more than surface deep, not just tolerating, which is what you do with a headache or a toenail that's ingrown or something, not just being aware of and not just even accepting, but being very grateful for the fact that we are a species that are, intensely and above all things and before all things, all on the human spectrum. And it's because of that diversity that we're worth anything at all. Doesn't mean that it's easy. But, then again, everything's hard before it's easy yeah. So anyway, that's my little spiel. Then I probably just took up like half of our recording. So sorry.
No, you said so many great things. And I love, I think that's so helpful. It's something I'm just thinking in 200 episodes, I've not had someone say it the way you said it, in terms of the fact that we do kind of get this information, the sensory issues, the anxiety, and we feel like we do have this like huge bundle or bucket of things going on. And I love that you're like, no.
Wrong even, not just going on, but wrong, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I love this idea of saying, no, you don't have all of these things. You're autistic, and all of these things are part of that. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I'd love to just go a little deeper or maybe just get your advice on this. Because again, we haven't touched upon this explicitly, this idea of high functioning, low functioning. I know that from the autism activists that I follow, that functioning labels are not cool. And so I don't use them in any of the work that I do in Tilt, but I'm in so many groups, and it just seems that parents don't know differently. And that's the way it's often presented to them.
Absolutely. And, look, I think that in the end, actually, you just said something very, very important. Number one, parents don't know differently, but then also there's, I think, and I'm speaking as someone, and this is important, just kind of reiterate that I'm not only speaking as someone who was identified. So I have 3 kiddos. It was after the first 2, and the third one was after me, which I often say, thank God I wouldn't have known what to do with a neurotypical child. But, like, seriously, I would not. But I think that, and my background also being in teaching and in counseling, right? Like, we as educators or counselors, we want to reassure parents that things are not quote unquote as bad as maybe, others make them seem. And then as the parent, you feel like you're in this position of having to justify yourself. It's this ridiculous, it's this cycle of, and I think that when we hear the HFA, high functioning autism, I understand that was how the word Asperger's, functioned really. Right. And it then was, repossessed, Leanne Holiday Willie, who actually wrote the foreword to my first book. And she's a hoot, coined the term Aspie. And that kind of became this sort of affectionate, geek chic, little term for all of us. And when the term became autism spectrum overall, there were a lot of us, myself included, who worried. I never would have thought about it, would not have entered my mind because of the way I understood the word autism. I never would have pursued, considered nothing, that wouldn't have been on my radar, knowing my kiddos. And so I thought, well, it's a really good thing that we have the word Asperger's, but what it really, comes down to though now, and I do think this is important, is that now autism is diagnosed, although the wording is still pejorative, I think, is diagnosed more by commonality. So it's, that sensory sensitivities, et cetera, things that we all share, no matter where on that spectrum we lie. The danger in the HFA kind of labeling is that, again, I'm going to just keep reiterating this, less obviously challenged does not mean less challenged. So for those of us who, that's why you see actually the further up the aptitude, cognitively, right? The more and more disparate are our, educational and professional achievements, right? So you see that instead of kind of keeping time with like on the graph, we're kind of at least keeping an even keel. There's this break where when that quote unquote IQ goes up, there are much greater rates of suicide and depression. And again, employment that's not commensurate or education that's not commensurate with that intelligence, relationships, relationship problems, et cetera, et cetera. And that is largely because, especially among women, but for sure both, there is a degree of, for both, it's more unintentional. For women, it's more intentional. But camouflaging, mimicking, right? And so when others see that we can do many things perhaps easier than even their quote unquote typical kids, that's when you get he or she's being lazy, he or she's being hypersensitive, blah, blah, blah. The things that are judgmental and character assessments, as opposed to it being that you literally, can I mean, this is certainly from my own experience. I remember clearly sitting in AP or honors classes in high school and thinking, I have no idea what the directions are for this, but dang it all, the teachers never would have known that because I'm coming back with A pluses. Well, I figured out sometimes ways to get around it or not. But parents and educators miss out on resources that honestly the kiddos really need, because they're not given to understand. They're not provided with information that says, quite frankly, who else is going to speak for, let's say, the folks who have a hard time accessing their words. We have much more alike than we have different. And I think that's important. We're a society that is, where there's this is not my, we're obsessed with labels in so many ways. Right? Whether that's your North Face jacket or whatever else, and we're also told labels are bad. And so it's this strange, but the label autistic, at least for adults, it tends, 9 times out of 10, for those of us who are identified as adults, is a relief, not a stigma, and presented to a child that way, presented as a see, told you weren't bad at this and bad at this. There's a reason your brain connects like this. What the heck are you supposed to do? Right? But you can do this really well and blah, blah, blah. I think what happens is without intention, we all look at our children to some degree, I suppose, as extensions of ourselves and our own egos. And it's bad, but it happens. So I think to some degree, especially if one of those parents has spectrum tendencies, to say, no, that's not my kid. Let's differentiate. But really in that moment, you need to ask yourself, I think, or one another, what does that mean? Do we feel that the child will be limited, will think less of him or herself, etc.? I don't know. To me, that's akin to days gone by with a child knowing that he or she was adopted, thinking that he or she was less important or loved. That's archaic. And that's up to the adults to undo, not to join in on, I think.
You're saying so many important
I know,
things.
blah, 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 blah.
No, but they're all so important. I mean, I think, as that last point that you made, I was thinking of the question I often pose to parents when they discover any sort of neurodivergence in their kids is, what are you making that mean? Because that's the work that we have to do on ourselves to understand what story are we telling about who our kid is and what their potential is based on this information?
Yes, I'm going to quote you on that internationally, letting you know right now. I love that phraseology because that's exactly what it is, right? If you remember the concept of absolute value from math, the idea that it's, a quantity is neither negative or positive, it's just a thing. So it's without judgment, right?
Right.
If you can look at a word without judgment, then you are making it mean something. What do we make it mean? There are words now that in the English language that had incredibly different connotations or in fact meanings 300 years ago. The word girl used to mean child in general, not a female child specifically, right? So it is about constructing meaning, and that's kind of up to us.
Yeah, 100%. We'll be right back after this quick break. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon. And that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls, and with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free. There are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words. Straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. I want to ask, I didn't know if I'm going to be able to phrase this question in the right way, but something you
can't, don't worry about it. No, go for it.
We'll go for it. Okay. So you were talking about balancing, in that response about high functioning, low functioning, and what does that mean? And that, the strengths and the challenges and seeing all of that. And I know that you are referred to and you own this idea of being relentlessly positive, right? Yes. And I will say, that the language, even the term differently wired, I use that extensively because it feels positive. It recognizes difference, but it doesn't talk about it as a way that's a deficit. And sometimes I get feedback from people who are neurodivergent adults who say, you're dismissing the challenges that I have when you use terms like that. And I just wonder, can you talk to that idea of balancing being positive and...
Yeah, no, here's the thing. You can't please all the people all the time. I mean, and that's really what it comes down to, right? So, this is last April 2019, my 7th book. So that was the memoir, Autism in Heels, had just come out and was being featured by the National Institutes of Health, during Autism Awareness Month. So I went, there were 4 of us, I think, who were on the panel. And I mentioned that ASD, the dynamic thing. And one of the panelists, had issues with that. And, in the moment I thought, well, dang it, let's not rain on that guy's parade. It was a good idea. Like, but I think to quote Forrest Gump, sometimes it can be a little bit of both. There are these quote unquote social rules, that we don't seem to, that nobody seems to teach us and are intuited by the rest of the world. But the odd thing, or at least ironic, is that most neurotypicals don't actually follow those rules. They follow them as they wish. And so we are known for being either or, right? All or nothing, on or off. I describe it as like being trains on, our thinking is like a train that, takes a while to stop it. And if you push it off the rail or try to change direction too fast, it's going to crash, or like fireflies all over the head. Yeah. Black and white thinking, they often say. But if you look at that, it's a perfect example of, well, it's either got to be this or it's got to be that. And language, by the fact that it was created by human beings, is going to be imperfect. We're going to need a lot more words to say, yes, it is all these things. And when you are really encountering the hard stuff, that also, I think, depends on where those people are in that moment. I was trying last night to explain some online content that I really want to be able to provide. And I was trying like crazy to explain it to my husband, who is a brilliant man. And here I am, who's a professional speaker and professional writer. So obviously words should be my friend, but I over explain because I am so accustomed to being misunderstood. And he had like literally whatever I was trying to explain was not, he's going, well, I don't, and my daughter was sitting there too. And so I'm looking over there like, is are there different words you think I need to say? And she is looking at me going, I have got nothing. Like I have no, and, and so, okay then. And in that moment, I can say as much as in others, I am feeling very autistic right now. And in that moment, it's not a good feeling. By the same token, I don't think I could do any of the work that I do if I weren't autistic, because it's about, identifying patterns in ways that others don't. And to some degree, I suppose that's because of our hypervigilance. We have to look out for patterns. We have to look out for similar circumstances because we are so often, falling into trouble spots. Yeah. But as a result, that enables me to have these conversations with you and say, here's what I've noticed in this country, in this country, in this country, and folks don't know about it, or folks don't notice it. And that's just as much me feeling autistic. I saw it. Yeah. You can't please all the people all the time. And I think for those of us who find ourselves in those moments where someone is going, well, I, take issue with, or whatever, I think the only answer is I understand it is never quite as simple as one word, is it? And also that's my big thing. I don't like to say, but I always say, imagine what can happen if you would substitute the word and every time you want to say but. Because when you say da 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 but blah, 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 you've just invalidated the first part of what you've said. It's true though. And so if you can say, I like to try to look at and celebrate the differences. And also I know that language is not sufficient. And we're doing the best we can in any one moment. So thanks for, that kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
So
that's great. Thank you for that. I'd love to talk a little bit about girls on the spectrum. I've done a couple episodes just on this and just how tricky it can be for girls to be identified. And even in the past couple of years, I feel like I've just seen so many more articles and so many more women are speaking out about their experience. Could you talk about, I know you're very involved and feel very passionate about this issue. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel kind of lucky. I was just ahead of the curve, I guess, with this stuff. In fact, if you look back to my first book, Asperkids, on the cover of it, it's like a cartoon of 3 kids, superhero kind of kids. And when they first delivered the original cover idea, I instantly said, because I have 3 children. I have a daughter, then 2 sons. And I had made it a point to discuss all three of them. And I said, no. You will have a girl and two boys. And they redid the cover. So it's my kids, essentially, supposed to be. But so I guess from, straight from the get-go, perhaps it goes along with my idea of what feminism is, which is not but the end, right? Like there is beauty and wonderfulness in male, female, and those of us as, what is the song from Kinky Boots, right? Men, women, and those who have yet to make up their mind, or, wherever you identify, I don't really care. The honest truth is. So it is a passion because I realized how much harder I had to work for my daughters and mine too, but identification than my sons. And really, it makes perfect sense. If you look at all the checklists, again, and go back to those diagnostic criteria or going through all those, never, somewhat, always things, we'll talk about like lines up trucks and blah, blah, blah. My daughter did she have any trucks? I wouldn't have not gotten her a truck. She definitely had cars, but but I didn't have trucks growing up. So could I look back and say, oh yes, I didn't. I had to go back and I had to say it. I often say it's a bit like, the red dress campaign. When it came to heart disease and the thousands of women, tens of thousands, I'm sure, were dying of heart disease simply because those in the medical profession were not educated in what the same physiological condition, how it presented in women. They were looking for the shooting pain down the arm and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, if you're having a heart attack. Well, those things are much more common with male presentation, but not with women. So women were go to the ER and being sent home and dying, right? So it was not eliminating the identification, but adding to it and saying, actually, there's more and. Yes. So for me, it was the same thing. I really had to go and sit down with the basic concept of what is, or picture a profile of someone who's on the spectrum was largely assembled by Hans Asperger in pre-World War II Vienna with school-age boys. And me sitting in a minivan in a bra with a love of glitter, like, what do I have in common with them? Right? So what I had to do was go through those phenotypes, right? Like the way you're presenting something, the way you're showing something, those behaviors, and say, well, what could be behind it, and try to inhabit them and say, no, I didn't line anything up. Then again, only one of my kids did, but I sure did put my Barbies into Tableau and take pictures of them and assemble wedding albums as opposed to interactively playing with them. It's the same thing, right? So achieving a sense of completion without the need for spontaneous social interaction, or honestly, theory of mind of thinking what someone else might do and trying to, so all of those things I was achieving in the same exact way, only it wasn't cars, it was Barbies. And so that's why, my heart sort of moved towards, but again, my boys, I love my boys so very, very much. It has absolutely moved towards including an emphasis on, hey, by the way, have you asked? I tell a story in Autism Heals where I had a woman come up to me at a conference and she said, hey, I wanted to tell you that you really pissed me off. I'm thinking instantly, I'm like backing away. Who are you, crazy lady? And she said, no, like I came to see you speak at another time a couple years ago and asked you some questions about my son. Who was on the spectrum, and you gave me some really good tips, and it was so helpful. And I'm thinking, now I'm really confused. How did I upset you? And she said, and then I talked to you during the book signing, and I also said I was having some challenges with my daughter, and I talked about some of them, and then you said, you know what? I think you might want to have her evaluated because I think there's maybe the exact same thing going on, but it looks a little different, And she said, and I was so angry. I thought, I'm directly quoting, who the hell does this woman think she is? And I'm thinking, why did you ask me? Like that's my area. Why did you ask me if you didn't want to hear it? And lo and behold, it turned out 2 years later, finally did. And guess what? She is. And I'm thinking, right, I wondered, was that closer to home because you're a woman? And so you saw yourself in her and that felt more right? Like, does that say something to you about you? And I don't know, but I just sort of said thank you and walked off. But that has stuck with me profoundly. Because the reality is that among girls and women on the spectrum, the diagnostic comparison is 8-to-1 ratio. But if you use, as they more often do in Europe, a gender neutral approach of, assessing, it's much closer to a 1-to-1. And the reality is that girls and women on the spectrum almost universally, and especially, and I'm talking primarily when unidentified and so therefore unsupported, right? But almost universally experience relationship violence and eating disorders. There's a story in Heels where a mom found me. Her daughter had passed away from complications from anorexia. She was in her early 30s. And the daughter, there was a grandson who had been identified as being on the spectrum, and she had read grandmother, I guess, had read an article about me in Scientific American and said, oh my gosh, it just resonated, reminded her of her daughter. Did I know anything about eating disorders and autism? And I said, well, actually, I was hospitalized in my 20s for anorexia. So yeah. But you're talking about ritualized behavior of trying to affect control when the world feels out of control. And the ribbon at the end of the story was she found some pictures on Facebook from her daughters. She just started going through them, her daughter's last birthday, and her daughter had been showing photos of this, some books that she had gotten that she had asked her father to get for her birthday. And one of them was mine. It was the Asperkids Secret Book of Social Rules. And of course, the grandmother, her mom, assumed that was for the grandson, but the grandson was in grade school. And I said, I got to tell you, that book is like tweens, but mostly teens and up, and lots and lots of adults. I call it curious adults, I said, I would bet you bottom that was for her. She did, in fact, ask her husband, and he said, yeah, no. She asked for that for herself. And the heartbreaking part is that, this grandmother said to me, if any of the clinicians had known to look, we might have saved her life. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that most adult women have been misdiagnosed at some point as being bipolar. And, then the doctors are shocked when the bipolar meds don't work for us or knock us out or whatever else, because we're not actually bipolar or we're this, that, or the other thing. So eating disorders to me should always, 100% of the time, be registered as a mental red flag and to do a better assessment, for what's going on beneath. But self-harm, unfortunately, suicide rates of depression, anxiety, school refusal, they are all profoundly higher for girls and women on the spectrum, and they don't need to be. But, you need the right, if I wear contacts, if you give me a hearing aid, that's not going to help me. If you give me visual, that is going to support me. You got to give us the right stuff. And so what I basically did was I assembled what I called the checklist. So I took the entire checklist, if you will, from Tony Atwood, who's, just a wonderfully world-renowned psychologist and now a good friend. But from his book on sort of here are the things, here's what it looks like in men and boys. And I turned them pink and said, well, here's what, they look like for us. And the response has been, I'll just say, profound. On one-on-one emails that I've gotten and women in their 20s. There was one gal who was going for her doctorate in neuroscience and was raped. And her mother, she said, my mom never understood me. I gave her this and it's all making sense now. And now I see that I'm not alone. I'm not, and having been, I was in a violent relationship in college. These are stories. I tell my own stories because I feel like that way it's the best way. I can't point to my finger at other people, but I can decide to open my heart and look back and say, okay, well, I don't need to be ashamed of mistakes that I made or trajectories that I was on when I didn't even understand where the heck I was going. And nobody else understood me either. So for me, it's really just about equal time. It's about protecting, and it's about looking forward. And for my daughter and others, what can we provide for them to help them, just like we want to for our sons, to help them become the very best human beings, the happiest human beings that they possibly can. And unfortunately, sometimes that starts with the very basics of simply saving their lives.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything. Because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
If you're a parent, I invite you to join us at the Mindful Mama podcast, where it's all about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. With sometimes hilarious and always thought-provoking experts and friends, at Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm Hunter Clark-Fields, and I can't wait to see you there. Listen in to the Mindful Mama podcast.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think it's a really important message for my listeners to hear. I do hear from a lot of parents of daughters who are struggling to even get referrals because it's presenting differently. And just hearing you talk about the cost of not addressing, or because so many girls may mask better because they are more invested in social relationships than boys might be. And I think this is just a great reminder for parents to really trust their intuition. And if they see things are not, that their daughters aren't thriving in a certain way, to continue to push for getting the answers and support they need.
Absolutely. That checklist that I was mentioning is, I actually have that as a free download on my website, because it's, to me, it is so essential that when you go into any kind of evaluation, there's, I say one mother so often, but talking about how the doctors didn't want to, quote unquote, assign that label because it's a heavy label and you can't get rid of it. And again, I go back to that, but if you have a door that's labeled pull and it's really a push door, sometimes labels are necessary for a moment so you know what to do. So anyway, that's something I kind of felt was essential to offer.
Mm-hmm. That's great. You're doing such important work. So as a way to wrap up, because we could go on, there's so much more, I might have to invite you back on the show again, but could you have so many resources, and I would love if you could just, I don't remember if I even told this as after we hit record, but I had mentioned that my introduction to you was maybe 6 or 7 years ago when I bought the Asperkids Secret Book of Social Rules, which I loved. And you've got an Asperkids website, which is an incredible resource. And your memoir as well, which I haven't read yet. It's on my Kindle. It's up after I'm finishing a novel right now, but I'm really looking forward to reading that. But you're just putting out such great content for people. So can you talk a little bit about Asperkids and then maybe how people can engage with you?
Absolutely. So I took a step back for a little while after doing the memoir. I danced for 20 years and I'm on the verge of back surgery number 5. And I also got remarried on Christmas Day. So it was a year. So, you know, I'm glad to say returning to all the work. So for those who were familiar with Asperkids and thought, where the heck did she go? Well, I'm also doing some really cool work in long distance in Philadelphia, where they've created the very first Center for Neurodiversity and Autism at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital. And I have the privilege of being their senior directorial consultant, which is the first time any hospital in the U.S. has actually employed someone on the spectrum to advise them, which is like, yay, the gal, Dr. Wendy Ross, who created it. I just adore her. She is a CNN hero and deserves it in every way, shape, and form. But yeah, so Asperkids, and what I'm trying to do is kind of funnel it all, so that it should be easier for everybody to find. Asperkids comprises the 6 first books, which ended up being the best-selling series in the world on and for people on the spectrum, which is like crazy. And then Autism and Neurodiversity is the 7th book. But I think the easiest way you can certainly, you know, drop in, it's JenniferO'TooleAuthor.com, soon to be JenniferCookAuthor.com. There's all sorts of craziness, but either way you get it, it'll be redirected. So you don't need to worry about it. And that's where you can find the free download, the checklist. That's where you can find information about each one of the books, and understand what's for whom. And, you mentioned the Secret Book of Social Rules, that book and those that all pair with it. There are summaries, explanations, on the author website as well. So you can kind of peruse and look, you know, to see what matches with what you think. And I always say start and, you know, and go from there. And then Heals is definitely something, you know, it's a very different kind of story. It's certainly an adult or at least teen, you know, read, because there's some heavy stuff in there and that's important to know about, but because it's my own personal experiences. But, you know, in the others, there are cartoons. So there's that. With lots of emphasis on pointing out all the ridiculous things that I've done, never on what the readers have done, quote unquote, wrong, because I feel like I got a lifetime of whoopsie step in it moments to offer. Better to focus on that and let everybody else just kind of feel cool about themselves.
Well, they're great resources, and I will have links, listeners, for everything on the show notes page. So you definitely, if you have a child on the spectrum or even a child who just doesn't understand social thinking, social rules, definitely check out Jennifer's work and her memoir, Autism and Heals, which congratulations, having written a pretty personal book. I know how it's a different beast to tackle. And It is. And I just finished recording the audiobook for it. It's the first audiobook by someone on the spectrum, and then also narrated by someone on the spectrum, man or woman. I'm blown away. I'm really excited. That's coming out in a couple of weeks. So congratulations. Wow. Well, Jennifer, this has been such an insightful conversation. I appreciate just you and everything that you're doing for our kids and for adults, and just the passion and your relentless positivity. It shines through.
Well, although that the caveat to relentless positivity is you are always, always, always allowed to have the moment where you just go, rah, this stinky pants, this is stinky pants, and then you have your moment and then you move on. Because if I'm sitting here telling you I'm smiling all day, every day, you're not going to believe it when it's really true. You got to keep it real.
Yes, 100%. Okay. Thank you again so much for sharing. And again, maybe we'll try to have you back on again.
I would love it.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. For the show notes for this episode, visit tiltparenting.com/podcast and search for this conversation. If you like what you heard on today's episode, I would be grateful if you could take a minute to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating or a review. Thank you so much for helping us stay visible so people who would benefit from the show can easily find it. If you want to support the show and help me cover the cost of production, please consider joining my Patreon campaign. To support the show, just visit patreon.com/tiltparenting. Lastly, if you aren't already part of the online community at Tilt, I invite you to sign up at tiltparenting.com on the box in the bottom where it says Join the Revolution. Every Thursday, I send out a short email with a quick note from me, a link to that week's podcast episode, and links to 5 stories from the news that week that are relevant to parents like us. Again, you can sign up and learn more about Tilt at www.tiltparenting.com.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.